And it appears there is a sense of joy, there is a sense of peace, there is a sense of connections with families, at least within the 12 tribes of Israel. But there is another twist of the whole story, as we are going to discover. I want to welcome you once again to Steady Insights. I believe you have been enjoying the episodes. I believe you have been learning new stuff which are required for progress in a scientifically modeled but a naturally created world by God. So Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has said, we will do. This is one of the most profound verses within the 5 books of Moses, especially in Exodus. And whenever we say Exodus, as we have discovered through our various episodes, it is linked or totally representative of the movement of the Israelites from Egypt. But here we are, where now, after moving out of Egypt, the Israelites come face to face with their deliverer, with God Himself. And it appears it is significant that they now learn who delivered them. They now come to understand what is required of them. So after loudly proclaiming the 10 commandments, as we have discovered in our previous episodes, it was important that God created a covenant with His people. It was a basic instruction, very simple. I will be your God, I will protect you, I'll bless you, obey my laws. As simple as ABC, is it? Well, there is a lot to that. So basically what we discover, and that really reminds me of a very important happening in history, is the proclamation of covenant promises and an affirmation from Israel. If you are an American and you know your history, or even if you are not an American and you've come into contact with history, you would have come across one of the most interesting episodes in the context of the commencement of what we now know as the United States of America. One compelling story you could liken to the covenantal proclamations in Exodus 24, verse 8. Where, as I've already established, God brings a binding agreement with Israel through Moses. It's the signing of the Mayflower Compact by the Pilgrims in 1620. You may be interested to know that this particular Mayflower Compact set the stage for the Declaration of Independence and even the strength and the eagle-like progress of the United States of America as we know now. Just as the Exodus covenant marked Israel's identity as a chosen people under divine law, clearly the Mayflower Compact represented an early American exodus from European oppression, which created a self-governing community rooted in faith and mutual agreement. If you go through the annals of history, you would see that the Mayflower Compact emphasizes the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. It prefigured the declarations and appeals to God's nature, creatorship, and His divine providence. And surprisingly, this is actually the basis of American independence and civil rights. Indeed, this particular Mayflower Compact has some semblance and parallels with what happened in Exodus 24, verse 8, as we will discover when we go on. In our discourse, as we usually do, we would want to critically look at various tenets as far as the covenant and the blueprint which was given through Moses to the Israelites are concerned. We would want to perfectly understand what really necessitated the covenant between God Himself and the Israelites, which of course was repeated as far as the unctioning of the American nation is concerned by virtue of the Mayflower Compact. We will look at the covenant, that is the blood of the covenant, the fulfillment of the covenant, and the covenant meal, what sealed the covenant. And finally, as far as we are concerned, the covenant didn't just end, but it rather paved way for a model. So it is imperative for us to know the purpose of this model and what really it means with regards to the preparation of the meal, with regards to the preparation of the model. The covenant. What was it? And how was it implemented? Clearly, when you look at the record of Exodus, Moses took blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you, in accordance with all these words." How was the covenant made? It is a question that is very significant. The Israelites are now out of Egypt. They've seen the power of God on Mount Sinai, and now they are being given covenantal promises. But it is noteworthy, aside knowing the details of the covenant, how really this covenant was made, and in extension, how practical it is, even to a nation which is now probably seen as morally deteriorating, but was enshrined in the foundations of divinity, the United States of America. How was this covenant made? The covenant was read, and we can see clearly from Exodus 24 verse 3 that it was perfectly proclaimed to the loud hearing of everyone present. And right after that, in fact, in the same verse, the people responded affirmatively. It wasn't a negative answer. All the people responded affirmatively. It was then recorded in writing. You'll be interested to know that this same procedure, one way or the other, forms the foundation of our legal systems in the world. Surprisingly, even though most of our judicial systems would want to toe the secular way, they are all inspired, one way or the other, from this covenantal strategy or procedure. Number 4, an altar was built. And it was for a very important reason. The altar would serve as the very important article which would seal this covenant. And for the witnesses as well as the beneficiaries, who are the 12 tribes of Israel present then, 12 pillars were erected. The number is not a mere accident. Basically, it represents the divisions or the tribes of Israel, meaning every person within the various 12 families was being represented. Then burnt offerings were offered. Half of the blood was sprinkled on the altar. The covenant again was read. for the hearing of all the people. Then, affirmatively, they responded. The blood again, which was half of the previous one, is sprinkled on the people. So number 7, you see the blood was sprinkled on the altar, representing the cleansing and confirmation. And secondly, the other half of the blood sprinkled on the people who are the beneficiaries of the merits of sacrifice. Then Moses now declares the blood of the covenant, which I will delve deeper into as we prologue. Finally, a meal is held to ratify the covenant. In other words, to accept the covenant to continue. It appears that the Israelites were now free from oppression. But this freedom was not meant to be free. And it really reminds me of another very important monument, still in the rising nation, the United States of America. Let me talk about this monument, and that is when you see why I make mention of it. You see, according to the various monuments and the commissions within the United States, one very prominent monument that we can easily identify when you visit the memorial in Washington, D.C. is the Korean War Veterans Memorial plaque. On this is written, "Freedom is not free." So the whole idea behind this statement is that this national monument actually honors about 5.8 million Americans who served during the Korean War. Basically, what is inspiring this statement is that you may get freedom, but it certainly comes at a cost. In the same vein, when the Israelites were entering into a covenant, it was with God, it was promulgated by God, and affirmed by the Israelites, in that the one who had delivered them from oppression had to now prepare them to his likeness in terms of holiness. The freedom that they had gotten was free because it was not on any condition. But to enjoy the merits of that freedom, they needed to align themselves to God Himself. And there, it was not free. So basically, the whole idea of the gospel was preached in Exodus 24. God recognized Israel as a people by erecting 12 columns. He especially valued the young, and He committed Himself to each person individually. Basically, He had called them without them paying anything. But the merits of calling them, by virtue of them being called the people of God, came with responsibilities. And that is the significance of the covenant. As we go along, it is noteworthy to discuss the fulfillment of this covenant. It is clear throughout history that the people of Israel have failed consistently to keep up or even to keep their side of the bargain. Keeping the covenant in a committed fashion was always short-lived within the history of the Israelites. But before I proceed, I have to quickly revisit the issue of the Mayflower Compact I started. And this is a fact you may have missed even as you go through the history of the United States. As I pointed out earlier, the Mayflower Compact served as the foundation for the Declaration of Independence. And you can see clearly that this compact followed parallel symbolism. That is what I call it. It followed what God had initiated in the covenantal process. The same way as the covenant was read, the compact was drafted aboard Mayflower and read aloud to all the passengers before they signed. And the people responded affirmatively, similar to the Exodus experience. This compact was recorded in writing. It became formal. Again, even though not as literal as the Exodus account, the pilgrims first acted within meeting houses for worship, symbolizing spiritual foundations. Again, they also presented themselves as a unified body politic, even though without explicit pillars. The pilgrims offered prayers and thanksgiving to God upon agreement, echoing the same sacrificial devotion exhibited by the Exodus covenant. You can go on and on and on, and basically the whole idea is America as we know it to be today takes a lot of inspiration from the covenantal experience of the Israelites, even linked to the motto "In God We Trust" during the Civil War. Wow! Then why is America changing gradually? Well, that is a question we would like to answer sometime to come. But basically, as we go through the fulfillment of the covenant, it appears that down history, as people always try to renew their relationship with God through a covenant, unfortunately, always people fail. The question is, what prevents us from obeying God despite our good intentions? Naturally, people tend to disobey because our neurons are always acclimatized to the idea of testing things for ourselves. And in that case, we always lose that purity which characterizes those who obey the covenant requirements. Today, I want us to be a bit practical. That is when you see the importance of the covenant meal. It is difficult in your own self to appear holy and to appease the requirements of this covenant. As we see in the example of Jacob and Laban, in the ancient East, it was important to ratify, to accept a covenant by sharing a meal. And this meal was shared by both parties, the proposer of the covenant and the one accepting. So how do we then connect this with what was referred to as the covenant meal? We see that at Sinai, God offered a covenant meal to 74 people. That is Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders representing all the people. In the typical fashion, when Jesus instituted the new covenant, he also did so by sharing his meal with the 12 apostles. Now wait a minute. You tell me, Isaac, the comparisons are not matching. Let me explain. The covenant meal proposed by God at Sinai happened between God himself, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders. Jesus Christ, who is the typical realization of this covenant meal, also repeated the same thing. Remember, according to the account of Luke, Jesus had ordained 72 people. In fact, they were the foundation of the whole gospel commission, who were in turn represented within the 12 apostles. So indeed, as the 70 elders represented the whole people of Israel ordained by Moses, the 72 or 70 people, as the Gospels recorded, also represented the new order of people who were foundationally the Church of God and the gospel carriers. In both situations, that is the time of Israel at Sinai and the time of Christ, there is the representation of the 12 tribes, that is the people, and the 12 apostles representing the triumphant church in the New Testament. In this case, every time we partake of the Lord's Supper, we renew our covenant with God. By partaking of the bread and wine, we celebrate the forgiveness and salvation we have in Jesus. Basically, God was providing a solution to the endless and continuous sinning and inability of man to reach the requirements of the covenant, to be pure and to obey him. When we partake of the Lord's Supper, the institution of the covenant which Christ came to fulfill, we give ourselves the opportunity to renew our connection, to renew our covenant with God. And that was the significance of the covenant meal God had offered to the people of Israel. It is nothing new, but perfectly clarified by Christ during the Matthew 26 Lord's Supper experience. Wow, this was the covenant. But of course, so far as there was a covenant, there was a significant item that needed to be done. God always guaranteed his presence within his people. And as a guarantee, he told them to build a sanctuary for him, giving them a model for this very important article. According to the writings, speaking of the historical records of the Exodus, there was a model given to Moses, and two very important people were handed the significant role of preparing the articles in this sanctuary. Remember, the Holy Spirit endowed these people with special gifts. And sometimes in the world you ask yourself, how is it that some people are so gifted technically with engineering skills? Well, they were made for the glory of God in a special way to connect man to God. Of course, when God had instructed Moses on how the sanctuary was to be made with a model, he also chose Bezalel and Aholiab to be spirit-filled for the preparation of those articles in the sanctuary. Bezalel, who directed the entire project, was the leader in terms of the artifacts and the creation of the articles. He was helped by Aholiab, his chief assistant. Then finally, other people were helping in this work. It is very important for us to note, before I end, that even amidst this whole preparation and the work of the sanctuary, it was still significant that the people remembered to keep the Sabbath holy. Sometimes we are so much engrossed even in what we believe is a service to God, but it does not take away the time we need to have our own reflection and reconnect with our Creator. It is important for us to understand that holiness is the key. And to approach a holy God, we must be holy like Him. And that Sabbath is the sign of that holiness. We have a model. We are given gifts. Every person has a special way within which he can provide a quota within the sanctuary. And yet, we still have the opportunity once every day to reconnect with the source of the knowledge and the source of wisdom. Don't forget, it is a covenant we have. And by partaking of the Lord's Supper, we get the opportunity to renew our allegiance to this covenant of grace. Are you doing this?